Today, my guest is Scott Lamp. Scott is a director with the Bureau of Drug Control Healthcare Quality in South Carolina. Scott is a pharmacist turned investigator. Sometimes I feel like I'm a pharmacist turned investigator, but Scott is the real deal. Welcome, Scott.
Thanks, Terri. Thanks for having me.
Sure
Me
thing.
to talk about something that I love to talk about, and that's diversion. So,
Excellent, excellent. Tell us how you got involved with the Department of Health and Environmental Control. I think you call it DHEC. How did
that's
you get involved with them, and how long have you been with them?
well, after 20 years of working pretty much retail, I was always interested in diversion, and I took my gatekeeping responsibilities very seriously. So it was kind of a natural progression into this field once I got the opportunity. That opportunity came in 2015, and then I actually graduated from the academy in 2016. So that's when I became a Class 1 law enforcement officer.
Okay, that's pretty cool. You mentioned to me that DHEC is similar to the DEA, but on a state level. Are there different regulatory requirements for those in South Carolina? Do they need to report out to you and the DEA if there are issues with controlled substances? How does that work?
Yeah, for the most part, our regulations mirror the DEA. There are some subtle differences. One in the diversion part of things as far as reporting. The DEA, I believe, says a significant loss where DHEC Bureau of Drug Control states any loss. So they are required to notify us, either submitting if they are going to do a 106 form to the DEA, they can send us that, or they can just report directly to us by another means, email or phone.
Okay. Okay. And then I don't know, I guess I shouldn't assume they have to report to the Board of Pharmacy as well. So it's three places that they're reporting to, or do you know?
Well, they would have to report to the board if they feel that there's, a pharmacist or, the appropriate board. If it's a nurse, then they would also have to report. We usually
Okay.
remind them of that if they contact us first. So.
Okay. But just a general loss, they don't have to report probably to the Board of Pharmacy then. So
No,
some
not unless
states you do. Okay.
yeah. It all depends on the situation. So.
Okay. Okay. Now, when there is a loss reported and you go into a facility, are there in general gaps that you tend to see? I know you go into hospitals as well as skilled nursing facilities. Do you kind of see a pattern of anything, or do they differ from hospital to skilled nursing, or do you kind of find they all have the same issues in general?
Well, it depends on the situation. So if it's an actual hospital, they tend to have good policies and procedures in place. But if it is a nursing home or a situation like that, it tends to be a little bit more of you got to show up and kind of dig in and see what we were working with at that point, because sometimes they have good policies and procedures, but they don't have great accountability. So it all depends, and a lot of times we don't have any video to work with. So I always say that when you first go into those kind of situations, it's really just show me the way, show me how to work this, and so you get ask a bunch of questions and kind of see where the gaps are, and typically there are significant gaps in that particular practice situation. So.
Yeah. So typically, do you leave there after you've been there for a particular situation? Do they kind of end up with a full gap analysis by the time you guys are finished?
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of times if it's the first time we've been in that facility, we may not be able to attain the probable cause and make an arrest, but that's not always the main outcome. That trying to find out where their gaps are and help them shore up those gaps, because as I mentioned, when we spoke previously, we don't regulate them because they have patient-owned medications. They're not actually ordering them. So we don't go in and inspect their facilities. Typically, we would go in and inspect a hospital every 3 years, if not more frequently. So yeah, it really is a challenge every time you go in there for the first time and try to help them shore up anything that they have going on that would um, allow diversion to happen easily.
Sure, sure. Yeah, when Scott and I spoke last time, he had me kind of wishing I was working in South Carolina when he was telling me what his agency does. And I think many of you diversion specialists out there may wish the same thing once you hear what they do. So, Scott, if I'm at a hospital and I think I might have a diversion issue, when is the ideal time for a facility to pull your office in, and what kind of services do you offer them?
Well, obviously, and I know you probably experienced the same thing where you get called in late and some things have already gone awry, which really in our case where we're trying to if there is a crime committed, we are trying to arrest that person, to put that roadblock, that full roadblock in that person's way so that they can see the consequences of their actions and hopefully make a change in their life. But yeah, it's as far as the services, we try to get into all the hospitals. It can be challenging because we are kind of spread thin right now. Still have some holes to fill in certain areas, but we're trying to get into the hospitals, establish that rapport so that they will contact us first, and that we can go in there and do that investigation from scratch. Because if we have to depend on other people to do certain parts, obviously they have a different role, where our role is specifically investigations and diversion, and we have been trained to do interrogations and interviews. So if you're not trained on how to do that, as you know, then a lot of times they don't do a real good job on it, and then we kind of have to take the ball from there, and it can be relatively challenging. So, not to say that
And
we
I,
don't. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, go ahead.
Not to say that, I mean, no matter where we come into the process, we are going to go 100%
Sure.
and try to find out what's going on. But a lot of times, if we end up getting called in the middle, we end up having to just go in and do an education and try to shore up everything so that the next time we'll go ahead and be able to get them the next time around. So.
Right. And you also will, I mean, if you're called in at the beginning, you actually will do the investigation of charts and automated dispensing machine, the reconciliation, and look for those patterns, right? You will do all that for them.
Right. And we used to have to do that, from scratch, get all the records for, 30 days. And, it's been very good for us as far as the time that we have to put into an investigation, where a lot of our hospitals now have diversion software, which helps to pinpoint certain things so that we can hone in on that, and that way we're not lost in the minutia of all the records that we would have to normally go through. Of course, if we are back in that nursing home situation, we have to go back to old school methods and dig in to about 3 months worth of records to find trends. So.
Yeah, and that's where the I wish I was in South Carolina comes in, because that's a lot of work, a lot of hours that can be poured into that, looking at the data, not to mention, as you said, the interview piece of it, that often, there's not a lot of people with the experience in that, with the clinical knowledge for that too. So you marry them together very well. So that's pretty cool. Now, most hospitals I know, at least the ones I've come in contact with, would never call the DEA in intentionally, right? It's like, no. But your office seems to provide such great services. Do you find that you're pretty welcome in the facilities? Or, I mean,
Well,
is it pretty well known that you're safe, that you'll come in and that you will help, and that you're, what your goal really is to assist, not find things and say, shame on you?
yeah, Terry, again, that really comes back down to that relationship that we try to build when we're doing our administrative or civil stuff, like doing our inspections. So if we can build those networking connections with the proper people in each hospital, then it tends to work out much better. We in one particular case, we had a local hospital here that was pushing back and, saying that they didn't believe that they had to provide us with certain records, and because of HIPAA. And so we had to get in the room. I went in with my field agent, and we explained to them that we are HIPAA exempt in this investigation, and so and that we're also pharmacists, and explain to them what we're doing, what services we are providing to them, and that we're not trying to derail anything that they're doing. Is that we're just saying that we, as far as the interview process, can do a better job because that's our bread and butter, basically. And so over time, and it didn't take a whole lot of time, we started getting a lot more calls from them. And then they found the value of finding these nurses or whoever is diverting, and it makes them look good. So they actually put in a diversion specialist to work with us, and she has been fabulous in her role. She's been in that role for a little over a year now, and we constantly get calls. Sometimes they turn out to be nothing, but
Sure.
she definitely calls us to look into it, and we appreciate that.
Yeah, well, what a fantastic story of the teamwork and how the law enforcement piece, the investigative piece, the pharmacist piece, it's all put together and everybody's got their specialties and they're utilizing your service, which is what you're there for. And that's fantastic. And in the process, I'm sure at the beginning, you help them identify where some of their gaps were and how they could improve on the prevention side, right? Not just the monitoring side. So it's a great example of teamwork. Can you share any cases of where you were called in and you participated in an investigation, some things that you may have discovered and how the interview went and any outcomes, that type of stuff? Just share a case study or two with us.
Well, I have one that, again, this is when I was a field agent at the time, and we were called in kind of spur of the moment. In this job, you can imagine you have a calendar set, and very rarely ever
Yep.
materializes the way you envisioned it. But so we got called to a hospital, me and another agent, and I don't really like to go into interviews cold, but we were pretty much going in cold. So we got there late one evening. The person that was the nurse that was involved, she was a 7 to 7, and so we got there that evening. We got as much information as we could. Tried to get ramped up to what we were going to be doing next morning was pulling her to talk to her. And one of the challenges there, of course, is not knowing their system. If you have that rapport and you've been into the hospital, you kind of know how they do things and you know their systems. So we talked, the other investigator and I talked about it, and we wanted to bring in the pharmacy manager to the interview because some people really don't. They shy away from bringing other people into the interviews. But in this case, I just felt like we were at a severe disadvantage about not knowing anything about this hospital and how they do things. So we did bring somebody in, and it ended up working out very well for us because she was trying to stonewall us on some of the things that we had brought to her attention. She was giving us what appeared to be a good answer, but when the pharmacy manager was able to rebuke what she was saying, then we started to break down the walls, and ended up she admitted to the diversion, but it took us a good I want to say over an hour talking to her and just keep chipping away. And she exhibited all the signs, like the head down and that kind of stuff. And we knew we had her pretty close to telling us what we needed to hear. And with that collaboration with the pharmacy manager, we were able to get the right outcome. So.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense because there are times when you hear what seems like a plausible story, but if you've got people in the room that know, I know there were several times where I was not in an interview and then I would have, human resources come to me later and say, okay, this is what, they said. I'm like, no, that's not even close to a good explanation. It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
but the moment is gone, right? So then you got to circle back, and then you're not quite sure where it would have gone from then. So yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Are
Yeah.
there any areas in general in facilities where you see big gaps, like, waste, or is it usually a charting where they're false charting, or is it just kind of all across the board?
Yeah, it all depends on what you're looking at, and that's kind of the beauty of doing this job, is that you never know what you're gonna step into, so to speak. And so we've had a kind of a run of CRNA or OR cases lately, and those have been more challenging because they do have policies and procedures, but it's not like the nursing floor where there really are ways they're supposed to be doing things. It's a little bit more of a Wild West situation when it comes to the OR. So those have been challenging, especially with what you just mentioned with the wasting. They're moving so fast, and a lot of times they're not really watching the way they should be watching, or they're not placing the drugs in the proper place. They put them in their pocket and walk around with them, which is very very hard to pinpoint whether they're doing that to divert or they're doing that for efficiency. So those cases have been extremely challenging, but we're working on different methods to make those cases in the future.
Yeah, those are challenging because it's not a specific order that this is the drug, this is the dose, this is the frequency, right? It depends
Yeah.
on what happens on the table, and different providers have their different order sets and the way they use things. So that right there is hard to compare. And then you've got the time in the OR or the time in the procedure, which it's definitely not cut and dried. It becomes a real comparison type of thing with a bunch of patient factors as well. And plus those areas I find extremely difficult, because even though on medicine floors and other units, I think they view themselves as kind of a family, in the OR procedural room, they are literally a family. I mean, they will put that wall up, to everybody. It's like, you are not part of this family. What are you talking about? We are fine.
Oh, yeah.
And so it can be pretty challenging. Well, I think your agency is pretty cool. I wish all states had them. I think you mentioned there's a handful of states maybe that have the agency like yours that kind of works in tandem and does a lot of the same stuff as the DEA, but on a state level.
Yeah, I know Georgia does have a unit that's very similar to us, and I just find it to be it's a good mix, having a pharmacy background and doing this, diversion. It's a big ask when you make that transition from pharmacist to investigator, but I think it just makes these type of cases, especially when you're working in hospital and hospital cases where you have a lot of different drug names, a lot of different operating systems, and I think we just ramp up to that kind of situation much quicker than your average officer would. Not that they couldn't do it, but it would just take a little bit longer for them to get ramped up to it. So.
Yeah, no, totally. I 100% agree. I think it's a nice marriage.
Yeah.
So that's great. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Scott. I appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to tell our listeners about what they do in South Carolina, which is pretty cool.
Thank
and
you,
those
Terri.
of you in South Carolina, if you're not familiar with the Bureau of Drug Control Healthcare Quality, become familiar with it, because it sounds like they can be your friend and be a real asset and come alongside you. So I think that's great. All right. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Terri. Have a good day.
You too.